Hi, we continue in Genesis 29 today as Jacob has arrived at the end of his long journey, which only takes a verse all the way from Bethel to Haran up here, and has met the shepherds at the well, and they pointed out to him, as you can see on the left side of the screen, that Rachel is coming with the sheep. So as we enter into our second part of our scene here, I just remind us of some things we've been going over, and if you haven't watched the introductory video to this section of Genesis 28:11 to 31:55, I really encourage you to do so. So the shape of the overall story has these three units as we've been looking at. We're now in the middle unit of Jacob and Laban, and we're right here at the end of this chiasm, first part of the chiasm here, 28:10 to 29:12, that goes all the way to 18, and then we have these other chiasms that follow. And I've been noting, it's not surprising that we have interlocking chiasms and overlapping chiasms, because so much of this story is circular and going out and coming back, having children and then raising the children. So there's a whole series of chiastic-like behaviors that matches the shape of it that way. We've also been looking at how we can read this at least three levels, and when we looked at the story of Jacob's vision and whatever it is that is described as connecting with the sky, whether that's a ladder, a ramp, or a road, we looked at those options in that video. We read that especially against the post-exilic situation, having inherited the tradition of Josiah's so-called reform, where he burned down everything in Bethel and saw it as the opponent of Jerusalem in idolatrous sort of terms. But as we saw in our chapter in 28, that Bethel is raised up as a place where Jacob, the founding father of Israel himself, experienced God and will later have an altar there. So that makes sense out of the post-exilic context. In our immediate story here, plainly the immediate plot is the main part of the story, because it's about Jacob and these characters, and it won't be until we see the two women and their two, call them maidservants, or we'll look at that more as we go, and we'll look at it also in the key words in a moment. So as the children of Jacob begin to be gathered into 12 sons and a daughter, as we'll see, we have the components, not the remnants, but the components of what will become the nation of Israel within the mythological view found here in Genesis, which is that Israel arises as 12 tribes eponymously named for the children of their founding father. So there's that level, which is also inside the story, but we're not really there yet, at least not in this passage. We're really pretty much around the question of Jacob just simply meeting Rachel and finding his way into the situation at the end of his journey. So as I've been looking at the key words, I've been noting a number of phrases that are repeated here, and we'll see today repeated 3 times in a short stretch, his mother's brother Laban, as you can see, matching what we saw in the previous story of place, place, place 3 times. So the writers are clearly highlighting what's important here. And as we'll see, what's important here is to see that Rachel is Jacob's cousin. And so in the question of how these families can go on and establish further generations, they have to walk this line between incest at one level and marrying outside their group at another level, which could dilute their understanding of who they are in relation to Yahweh and in relation to the growing sense of ancestry across now and the 3rd generation. So that's a major tension in the story, as we'll see. Another aspect of it that we looked at briefly, and I won't go over it much now, but just to know what's in the background, is how Spolstra shows, and I looked at this more last time, how this story is in many ways parallel to, but also inversion of the wife-sister stories that we saw with Abram and Sarai, then Abraham and Sarah, and then Isaac and Rebekah in chapters 12, 20, and 26 earlier. So as we get into more of the issue of Laban's deception and Jacob ending up with Leah and Rachel, we'll bring that up some more. And finally, also in the background, and again we won't look at it so much right now, is this whole story of Laban and his daughters as an allegory of the monarchy and exile. But we'll again look at that more as we go. So we left off here with, here is his daughter Rachel coming with the sheep. And immediately Jacob goes into action. The moment he sees Rachel, he obviously has the strategy of trying to get the shepherds out of there so he can be alone with this woman whom he's just met. He knows nothing about other than that she is the daughter of his mother's brother. And so the one he's been looking for, at least that's how he understands it, and there's no alternatives apparently in view. And so here's his strategy that we see here. Look, it is still broad daylight, or literally the day is great. And we noticed a gadol earlier. We'll see a couple more gadols around Leah's relationship with Rachel, although it's not. I didn't put it as a key word here. So the day is still great. It's not time for the animals to be gathered together. Notice how Jacob is walking into this strange place with people he just met and very boldly telling them what to do. As I noted last time, it was amazing enough that they talked to him. They don't just run him out of the area as a usurper, much like we saw that the people of Sodom did to Lot's visitors, who turned out to be divine visitors, but they didn't know that, but as suspicious as they were of strangers. And there, at least one of their locals, Lot, had welcomed them in. But here's a stranger that nobody knows and nobody's ever seen before. Literally, they have no sight of him, no experience of him at all. And now he's telling these shepherds what to do, and they have an interesting response. They don't argue with him or get mad at him, apparently. They just explain the detail. So he says it's not time for the animals to be gathered. Water the sheep and go and pasture them. They had told him ahead that they can't do that until the others come to roll the stone away. Or they say that now, as we'll see. And so he will go into further action. There's Sharon Jean some pace notes below. The shepherd's refusal to leave foreshadows how Jacob will have other men, that is Laban, interfere with his desire to be alone with Rachel. So we'll see that there. So their answer is we cannot water them and pasture them until all the flocks are gathered together. We don't know how many that is, but it's more than the 3 of them. And we've seen that, this image. That's my reference here is to this repeated phrase here. And the stone is rolled away from the mouth of the well. My note below notes that they don't say they have to do it, which leaves room for Jacob's feet. Maybe, as we'll see in a satirical version of this in just a moment. So they leave Jacob believing he's got to wait for some other shepherds and flocks, we don't know how many there are, to come. But he's not going to be patient for that. As Westerman notes, this verse of Rachel coming with their father's sheep presupposes that at that time girls helped with the work and were able to move among the men freely and unhindered without the veil, which for Westerman in a patriarchal culture is surprising. And we don't see many female shepherds, but that's what she is, despite the New RSV translating as kept them. As Willa Gaffney notes, using a womanist perspective here, she says, I note with curiosity that the New RSV translation reduces Rachel to merely keeping sheep, without naming her as a shepherd, as does the Jewish Publication Society and Everett Fox and others. And so that's just a matter of the translation not honoring her as a shepherd. They're not her sheep, or they're her father's sheep. And Laban does have sons. We don't know that yet, but he does have sons. So why she's taking care of the sheep and not his sons, we don't know. But when it comes to the sheep shearing, Laban will certainly go out with his sons for the festivities around sheep shearing. So now we go from seeing what Rachel's doing back to Jacob's perspective. And notice how we're seeing this whole thing now from Jacob's perspective. As Westerman notes, this is a fine example of the narrative art which can portray in wordless action the climax of feeling resulting from a sequence of events. And notice how this all happens in silence. Let me scroll down a few more verses here. Notice that neither Jacob or Rachel speak to each other in this scene at all. Jacob was speaking to the shepherds and they to him, but this all happens completely wordlessly here. So when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of his mother's brother Laban, repeated yet again here 3 times in the verse, and the sheep of his mother's brother Laban. Notice this is really awkward, as we might hear it to have to repeat that every time. Who else of their sheep would it be? Although in verse 9 the narrator said her father's sheep, and now we hear the sheep of his mother's brother. So this is in relation to Rachel, but this is in relation to Jacob. Jacob went up. And as my note below has, the verb can be used for to express drawing near either to God or intense interpersonal situations. That's only here in relation to an inanimate object. And then he does the superhuman thing. The mama's boy, the guy who's been hanging around at the tent, not the hunter out in the field like his brother, rolled the stone from the well's mouth. As Westerman notes, the only instance in which Jacob is granted a superhuman power in his service of love. But is that what it is? Is he granted a superhuman power, or is it testosterone? Because he's going to kiss her in the next verse. So he's fired up one way or another, and we can call it superhuman if you want, or we can simply say lust, although it will be described as love, can empower many actions. And so, and I would note this from the Preoccupied Territory website with this headline: Shepherd's Union says Jacob violated regulations by moving rock off well by himself. In the subcaption, in further violation of regulations, he proceeded to water the livestock of the shepherdess Rachel, the daughter of Laban. And goes on, and I'll post that to the radicalbible.net page, although you can also find it online at the Preoccupied Territory website. A very nice satire, but also a sense of what would really be going on here. The shepherds might not have a union, but the audacity of this strange young man showing up here, telling them what to do, and when they don't do it, doing it himself against all custom. Well, Jacob is going to find the price of violating custom, or at least ignoring custom, when the wedding night comes. But for now, we see him not paying attention to that. And that may or may not have something to do with the audience, the post-exilic audience, recognition of the struggle of how much do they pay attention to the Persian customs that are happening all around them, including the book of Ezra's demand to obey the law of the king as equally with the law of Yahweh. So that might be some of the post-exilic elements in the background here in Jacob's audacious behavior. But maybe that's also reading more into it than the author intended at this point. So then he kisses her. And many authors describe this as a love story, but is it? As Sarna notes, the only instance in a biblical narrative of a man kissing a woman who is neither his mother nor his wife. And there's a wordplay with watered here, as you can see, Viashak here and Viashak there, spelled a little differently, but they sound similar. And yet, is there consent? What does he know about Rachel? He's not said one word. He hasn't introduced himself. He hasn't even said, I'm your cousin Jacob. Look how different this is than Abraham's servant meeting Rebekah at the well in chapter 24, when he speaks to her and he watches her and she waters all his camels, which is incredibly extravagant and labor intensive. And yet here, Jacob, simply seeing her, rolls the stone away, then waters all of her flock, her mother's brother flock. She says nothing the whole time. At least in chapter 24, we saw the inner thoughts of Abraham's servant as he watched Rebekah do all that powerful watering of camels. But here, she's completely quiet. Is she appreciating this? Does she like this young man? Does she wish he'd just go away? We know nothing about it. She's just going about her daily business, and suddenly this stranger walks up to her and kisses her and weeps aloud. And we hear nothing from her. We don't hear leave me alone. We don't hear who are you. We don't hear whether she enjoyed the kiss. She's left completely as a cipher here. And he wept aloud, giving this another assonance with the kiss. So the watering, the kissing, and the weeping all have an assonance there. As my note below, echoing 27:38 with the same two verbs from Esau, not kissing, obviously, which frame the story with the cause for Jacob's departure in the first place. So here we'll see the only action of Rachel here. We still see no live speech. Jacob told Rachel he was her father's kinsman, literally her brother, but understood here more broadly, and literally he's his nephew. So he could have said that, but it's instead giving the whole broader thing. And brother's exactly what he called the shepherds, which he's not related to in any way, not blood or ethnicity or anything else, as far as we can tell. And that he was Rebekah's son, which is to say her aunt's son. So we see that there, but not Isaac's son. Notice he doesn't name that here. Is this simply a matter of the immediate plot, or, as Gaffney notes, a part of the matronymic process seen elsewhere as the sons of Zerai in the Deuteronomistic history, or Ruth and Orpah in Ruth? So all we hear when he tells her that in indirect speech is she ran and told her father. It's a very interesting thing that the author puts this in indirect speech, so we don't hear their voices out loud, and we don't have any emotion that goes along, other than what we can infer from running. But is she excited about it? Is she upset about it? There's no camels, there's no bling, there's no jewelry or anything that we saw in chapter 24 to make Jacob attractive. So we see already in the next verse when Laban heard the news, but how will Laban respond to the news that his apparently penniless cousin has arrived by himself and shown up at the door and kissed his daughter? We'll see what happens to that next time. See you then. Bye-bye.